How you doing, folks? This is Rex coming to you with episode 6 from a veteran's point of view. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about Tucker Carlson. He's a well-known TV and radio host, and he usually hits it on the head pretty good as far as the GOP and the conservatives go. Does a good job of getting the reality out there. So I'll be breaking in every now and then a little bit on his commentaries there. But before I get started, let me remind you that we got the 4 chaplains story. I'll be out at the Dayton VA on Friday at noon, February 3rd, recording that event for you to watch. Pretty awesome event. It's a story about 4 chaplains that whose faith in God was so strong, and the things that they did the day that their transport ship got torpedoed was February 3rd, 1943. You need to make it out for that event if you can. The Miami Valley Military History Museum will also be over there doing a pinning ceremony for Vietnam veterans, in case you don't know what that is. That's a proclamation from President Obama, and a special pin was created for Vietnam veterans saying welcome home. Buckeyenest has been involved in a project called Welcome Home, and I'll tell you a little more about that later on. Maybe even show you some video about it. But for now, hope you enjoy this. You can contact me anytime at 937-926-4914. Email address is webmaster@buckeyenest.com.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Pretty good show up ahead, I have to say. We'll be talking to a leader of one of the many airport protests that swept the nation. It may have kept you from missing your flight. We'll also be debuting a new segment looking at what our top journalists really think when they're not writing or on camera. Pretty interesting. But first, President Donald Trump's executive order, his command that citizens of 7 Muslim-majority nations not be allowed into the U.S., at least temporarily, was greeted with astonishing hostility from both the left and even fellow party members on the Republican side. The White House is not backing down, though, and Press Secretary Sean Spicer claimed the meltdown over the weekend was utterly unjustified. This is part of what he said.
This has been blown way out of proportion and exaggerated. Again, you talk about in a 24-hour period, 325,000 people from other countries flew in through our airports, and we're talking about 109 people. It's a shame that people were inconvenienced, obviously, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a couple hours. Being able to come to...
Well, joining us now is one critic of the president's executive order. Mark Hetfield is CEO and president of HIAS, an international refugee resettlement organization, indeed the oldest in the United States. Mark, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
So you issued a statement when this happened a couple of days ago, and part of it you said this: with the stroke of a pen, Donald Trump has abdicated American values. You didn't explain what those values are or how you might be privy to them exclusively, but I compared that against the public polling on the question, and I thought it was interesting. So the majority, according to the Rasmussen poll, 57% agree with this. And there's also, going back a long time, and I know you know this because you run this agency, strikingly low favorability on the question of whether we should admit refugees at all. So over the summer, just for example, there was a poll on should we admit Syrian refugees. 36% supported it, 64% did not. Are they somehow not aware of American values or acting against American values? What do you make of these people?
Well, I mean, all I will say is...
Well, I've been watching what's going on lately around the internet, different videos, all these protests going on. I have to comment on this statistic that Tucker just quoted about Syrian refugees. 64% were in favor of Trump doing this to Syrian refugees in direct respect, and 36 were not in favor. But yet the media had to jump in and show all the bad stuff. That 36% that were not in favor, they had to get up there and show their butts. They had to show the people at the airport protesting. And of course, those people at the airport were claiming they were there for rights and standing up for their rights, and that they loved people and things of this nature, but they never thought about the problems they were causing when they were standing out there in front of that airport protesting, stopping people from going in and getting on flights and being able to get out of the airport. So I don't see much love there. And of course, we know that it's already happened. Syrian refugees terrorists have snuck in with other refugees and committed acts of terror right here in this country. But yet these snowflakes, these people, want to let all refugees in. They're saying that 109 people got detained that day after the executive order was signed, but they're forgetting that there was probably reasons those 109 got detained, got held up. Might have been problems with the security people at the airports. But in any case, 325,000 flied that day and came into the United States. I don't see the correlation there. The percentages are so low and so small. But yet some of you are still going to jump up and scream, we're a nation with open borders and we take in all the people. Well, that has to stop. A whole bunch of people died in a nightclub. Lesbians, gays, down in Florida a few months back. Then you got San Bernardino stuff. A whole bunch of people died there. And I could go on and on and on, but I won't. Let's get back to the video.
America slammed its doors on refugees in 1921, which is why 6 million people were trapped inside of Europe during the Holocaust and couldn't escape, because the United States and other countries failed to protect refugees, failed to allow people to flee. So
I'm sorry. You're saying that the Holocaust happened because of American immigration policy?
No. I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm not saying that.
Because hundreds of thousands of Americans died fighting the Nazis.
Absolutely. But what did happen is America turned its back on refugees during that period, just like we're turning our back on refugees right now. We're not responsible for the crisis in Syria, but we do have some responsibility to protect the refugees who are fleeing for their lives.
Okay. Well, I guess here's why I asked that first question. I think you've got a legitimate point of view. Lots of people I know are for admitting refugees, for sure. When you invoke the phrase American values, though, it suggests a set of absolute rules, and I'm not sure I know what those rules are.
Right.
So let's get right to what the rules are about American values, as you put it. So who has a right to come here?
Who has a right to come here? I mean, it's not about having a right to come here. It's about America standing up for refugees.
So America has an obligation. I mean, I think we're saying basically the same thing. So America has an obligation.
Refugees don't have a right to come here per se, but a refugee who's been approved for refugee status by the United States government should be allowed to come here, and they were all turned away. I had to spend my Saturday dealing with a Syrian mother, her 5-year-old daughter, their 8-year-old daughter, who was trying to join her husband who had asylum in Connecticut.
Right.
They had an approval notice. They had been cleared and vetted. They got on a plane in Amman, where they had been living as refugees for 3 years. They get to Kiev to connect to the flight to JFK, and they get turned around and get sent back to Amman.
That sounds like a nightmare. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to them. I am. But I want to get back to the core principle here, because I think it's really important. You're saying it is an American value to admit refugees, and I'm asking you what the standards are. There are a lot of 60 million refugees around the world, according to the United Nations.
Right. And
there are countless, hundreds of millions of other people fleeing, I don't know, poverty, bad government, bad education, no health care, starving to death in some cases. What percentage of those do we have an obligation under the American values you refer to admit?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you one thing. The percentage is not zero. And that's the percentage.
But tell me what the criteria are.
I'm not going to go over what percentage.
This is what you do for a living. Tell me.
Sure.
You invoked American values and suggested anyone who's against what you're for is somehow in contravention of American values.
Well,
it's a big thing to say.
America has been welcoming refugees throughout its history, with some very shameful interruptions, such as the interruption between 1921 and 1960.
I got it. You said that. So, but you're not answering the question, which is, how do I know which refugees need to come here if you identify the American values that you're referring to? What are the rules? if you're going to run around with moral statements like, oh, you're a bad person because you're against refugees, tell me what the rules are so I can be a good person.
Yeah, the rules are that you need to welcome those people who need protection. The United States needs to play a role. You see, the United States is a leader in refugee protection. And what makes us a leader isn't the number that we take. It's the way that we treat refugees when they come here. When a refugee comes to the United States, he's not known as a refugee. We don't put them in camps. We welcome them as new Americans.
In camps? No, we spend a lot of money on them, huge amounts of money on them, as you know. We spend a lot of money on your organization, which takes a lot of tax dollars.
But here's what, Tucker, I'm not arguing against that. Raise that, Tucker. I'm glad you raised that. I'm really glad you raised that.
I wasn't attacking you. I'm merely saying we're very generous. That's the only point I'm making, and I think we should be. You are not answering the question, which is, in a world where there are tens or hundreds of millions of people who are fleeing all sorts of awful things, like
Tucker brings a lot of these people on his show, and he tries to get to the bottom of things. He's trying to get an answer out of this man. What is it? What can we do to figure out who belongs in this country, who can come to this country, and who can't? What can we do? This guy keeps sidestepping it, never does make an answer to the question. Then I come to find out that federal government gives his organization, his nonprofit, $2,075 for every refugee that they help get organized in the country. Gotta wonder if those terrorists involved in that Fort Lauderdale nightclub shooting, and the San Bernardino people and all the other people, if the feds didn't get, if that organization, Hayes, helped them get settled and didn't give them $2,075, and I wonder if that money was used to buy weapons and ammunition so they could commit their murders. Guy in Ohio State didn't need that much money because he just used his car or his truck or something, if I recall, and a butcher knife, just stabbed people, ran them over. Syrian refugees. Kate Steinle. Last thing her dad heard was, "Help me, Daddy. Help me." Another illegal alien. Been deported 6 times and come back in the country on the 7th and murdered that lady. Murdered Kate. Cold blood. Shot her. I heard that the state of California wants to succeed the country and become its own nation. Spent many years in the military and in civilian life doing special security, high risk stuff. Worked at Hopkins International Airport for many years. All my life I've been doing that to protect people's rights and property, so you're going to be awful shocked when you hear me say, let California succeed from the country. I worked out there for 25 years, security. Let them succeed. Then when we start building that wall down on the southern border, we'll just keep on building it right up the California border, put a gate there, charge a tariff and a tax and a toll for those people to come into the sane side of the country. And we can let all the snowflakes and all the lame brains and all the illegal aliens live in their own nation, Southern California. And then when they start screaming for help because Mexico invades them, how many of you remember a little term called Mazatlan? That's the area that the white Americans took away when we defended the Alamo and defeated the Spanish, the Mexicans, claimed that land as ours. And the Mexicans have been wanting it all back for years. So, and then of course there's quite a few sanctuary cities in Southern California and in Northern California. I can recall one time I stepped out the doors to take a guy down for shoplifting. He stole some lunch meat or something. As I stepped out the door behind him to snatch him up, sheriff's deputies stepped up on each side of him and shoved riot shotguns up into it and underneath of his ears, right here underneath each ear, so hard that I literally saw his head raise up. And it wouldn't surprise me if a half inch of his feet, if he just didn't clear the ground by a half an inch, and they were taking him down for murder, and here I'm going to go bust him for shoplifting. Pretty nuts out there. Pretty nuts in Southern California. I never made it much up to Northern California, but pretty nuts in Southern California. Let's go back to the video.
Through that lens,
right, well,
and you're dodging it.
Well, first of all, Tucker, you just said my organization takes a lot of tax dollars, so I'm obligated to respond to that.
Okay.
So let me respond to it.
Okay, fine.
Let me respond.
But get to my question, though.
I will. I promise.
Thanks.
So we get $2,075 per refugee. That is true from the State Department. What do we do with that? We pick them up at the airport. We bring them to the apartment, which we've rented. We pay 3 months' rent for that apartment. We stock it with food. We put furniture in it. We get the kids in school.
You're great.
We get them to medical appointments.
Great.
Okay.
I'm glad.
We get them transportation.
Okay. But you're dodging the question.
We get them a job. We teach them English. I pay my staff with that money. $2,075. Try to pay rent for 3 months with that amount of money. Right. You know how we do it? Because we have to raise lots of private funds. We have lots of volunteers who participate.
Mark, you're a little defensive on the question. I would point out, we looked at your IRS forms. Actually, it looks like the majority of the money you get comes from taxpayers, just for the record.
That's
about
correct.
60%.
I just told you.
Right, that's fine. So they have an interest in knowing what the rules are, what the policy is, right? It's not just you and a private organization raising money from good-hearted people.
Right.
You're taking money from people by force through the tax code. The government's giving you money, and it's our money. So just answer my question. How do we know when we have an obligation to let someone in? Why not let all 60 million? Do we have an obligation to do that? And if not, why not?
Absolutely
60 million fleeing from harm. Why don't we have an obligation to let them in?
We have an obligation to see how can we play a role. How can the United States make refugees safe by taking some and then allowing the host country to protect the others?
So here's one other point. I mean, but not with any specificity that's useful for our viewers. Okay, here's the point that you made in your statement. To deprive refugees of safe haven is to scapegoat vulnerable human beings.
Correct.
And to confuse those who flee terror with terror itself. Now,
correct.
I'll just stipulate, I think most refugees are in a tough spot, and I really feel for them, and I think they're probably really good people, okay? But this statement suggests that anybody who's worried about refugees maybe hurting Americans or hating America, and some do, is some kind of crackpot or a bad person. And I could read the list of terror attacks or plots by refugees in the past couple of months. They're real. Not a ton of them, but there are some. Will you concede that people have a right to be concerned? Or are they just all big us?
No. Of course. I mean, everybody who comes to this country should be screened, and refugees are screened more thoroughly than any immigrant, any American. Absolutely.
So do you ask the refugees that you bring in, do you believe, for example, in female genital mutilation?
You know what? Highest doesn't bring in refugees.
Oh, you just said that you got them jobs and apartments and all that stuff. Do you ever ask any of those people whether they believe in the Constitution, think women should have rights, think gays should be killed? Do you ask them those questions? And if you don't, why don't you?
You know what? Refugees tend to be very apolitical. Because refugees tend to be very apolitical because they fled.
Those aren't political questions; those are cultural questions. And do you ask them? You're helping these people come to this country. Why wouldn't you ask them? Do you believe in the country you're coming to?
Refugees have one thing on their mind, which is they want a normal life.
Well, I'm an
American. Want to become Americans.
But do they believe in the Constitution? That's a fair question to ask. I'm a U.S. citizen, so
you know what?
Why wouldn't you ask that question?
Our refugees. One of the great things about this country is refugees are on a path to citizenship from the moment they enter. Okay, every refugee wants to be a citizen.
You're not going to answer any of my questions.
No, I'm going to eventually. I mean, part of that is to take a civics exam. Part of it is to swear allegiance to the Constitution.
But isn't it kind of irresponsible for you not to ask, since you're, as you said, you're paying for their schooling, getting them jobs, teaching them English. You don't want a bunch of people who believe in female genital mutilation coming in the country, do you? These people, some of them are coming from countries where it's almost universal. Why wouldn't you say, we don't do that here? Why wouldn't you say that?
Homeland Security screens refugees, not highest.
Oh. But you're taking all this money. I think you'd want to do that just as a responsible person.
I told you how much money we get. I told you what we have to do with that money.
Mark, we're out of time. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
Thank you. I did too.
I don't know how many of you out there watching me this evening has ever paid any attention to the videos that are recorded over in Germany and Paris and things of that nature. We've only tasted a little bit of terrorist activity here. Those countries are being taken over completely. Pretty soon there's not going to be a European countries left that we'll be able to recognize. It's happening north of us. The Prime Minister up in Canada wants to start bringing in refugees from those foreign countries. Economists and people say that we stunt our growth if we don't allow refugees in. Problem is, like they say over in those foreign countries, Germany and Paris, when they go on their raping sprees, they plant the seed. Pretty soon the ladies that they raped are having Muslim babies. Pretty soon the Muslims are going to populate those countries 10 to 1, 20 to 1, because we simply don't procreate fast enough to keep up with them. So, given that thought process, how are we going to vet these people? How are we going to know who's coming in that's a straight up person just pleading for help? And how are we going to know that the one right behind him isn't a terrorist part of a sleeper cell? Gets in the country and then a couple months later just goes off and kills a bunch of people. How are we going to know? We're not going to know until we stop these border crossings, until we stop the immigration from coming in on aircraft and boats, until we stop it so we can sit back and reorganize, create a better vet process. That's how we're going to know. The gentleman spoke about he had to go in on a Saturday. I have to comment on that too. He had to go in on that Saturday and help those refugees get admitted into the country. Now the key word is he had to go in on a Saturday to do this. When I worked security, I didn't get Saturdays off. I didn't get Sundays off. Because I was in management and supervision, I was on the call 24/7. And there was many days that I worked 7 days a week at Hopkins International Airport and other types of security assignments, protecting you from murderers, terrorists at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. Not to mention all the places I worked in Southern California. So, our country's falling apart. Let's get back to the video.
Do you? These people, some of them come from countries where it's almost universal. Why wouldn't you say, we don't do that here? Why wouldn't you say that?
Homeland Security screens refugees, not bias.
Oh, but you're taking all this money. I think you'd want to do that just as a responsible person.
I told you how much money we get. I told you what we have to do with that money.
Mark, we're out of time. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
Thank you. I did too.
Thanks. Well, Trump's executive order isn't just sparking defiance from protesters, it's also riling up the Justice Department. Today, the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, announced her department will refuse to defend the executive order in court. What does this mean exactly? For more, we're joined by Fox News correspondent Trace Gallagher. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, the reason the Attorney General says she won't defend the president's executive order in court is because she's not convinced it's legal. In a statement late today, Sally Yates writes in part, quoting, "My responsibility is to ensure that the position of the Department of Justice is not only legally defensible, but is informed by our best view of what the law is after consideration of all the facts. Critics say her decision is much more political than legal." Meantime, despite protests and legal challenges aimed at the president's temporary travel ban, the administration is calling it a success story. with the president himself blaming any disorganization on others, tweeting, quote, only 109 people out of 325,000 detained and held for questioning. Big problems at airports were caused by Delta computer outage, protesters, and the tears of Senator Schumer, referring, of course, to Chuck Schumer, who teared up when he talked about the ban. And today, Trump signed another
Well, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates got fired today. Frankly, I hope when they throw her out the front door that they put a boot so far up her ass it's going to take her 6 months to be able to take a shit and wipe her asshole. Another snowflake. Country needs to come together. This man got elected on November 20th. And we still got our young people running around, and some old farts, running around the countryside acting like idiots. We need to come together. When you got a lady like Sally Yates that's supposed to be defending our nation and refuses to defend the policies of the president and refuses to, she's lucky I wasn't president. She's lucky. According to this immigration thing, I've already commented once and I'll do it again. Think about this policy for a minute. Let's let the refugees come in. Let's bring in the young men, their wives, their kids. Let's put up the wives and kids. Let's ship all these young men back to their countries that are able to fight, and give them a rifle and let them fight for their country, restore it. Let's take good care of their family while they're here. Then let's restore, let them restore their nation, and then give them the option to have their family sent to them or come back to this country and live. I think that's one hell of a vetting process. And frankly, I think that it will save a whole lot of our soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors' lives. And we won't be over there fighting their war for them. Let's consider that thought, or better yet, I just had a better idea. I talked a little bit ago about California seceding from the country and becoming their own nation. Well, we could let all the immigrants, all the illegal immigrants, come in on our western border into California, set up the vetting and processing stations there in California, since they want to allow all the illegal immigrants into their state and protect them from the big bad federal government. Drag them in there. Let them go in there after we build the wall, after we let all the sane citizens, and there's not very many of them in Southern California or even in California, come back to the sane part of the country. Let's get back to the video. I get so aggravated when I watch and listen to this stuff. Lose a few more hairs. That's why Franco, that you used to see back there, he got so mad that he just went on a leave of absence. Maybe he'll go AWOL, I don't know. I hope not.
Protesters protesting President Trump's refugee ban. They did it so at airports across America, causing some people to miss their flights. Thousands turned out from coast to coast. We're joined now by a leader of one of those protests, Cameron Whitten. He's in Oregon. He's on the organizing committee of Portland's Resistance, an anti-Trump group. Cameron, thanks for joining us. So,
thank you for having me here, Mr. Carlson.
Thanks. So you were at one of these protests. You've been in a bunch of protests recently, but you're particularly spun up about these executive orders that President Trump signed. What about them specifically bothers you?
So we've seen a lot of action coming from the White House since January 20th. Yeah. And it just seems like we see so much coming at us. There's so much to read. and we're responding. And for me, I am very troubled to feel that President Donald Trump, who was elected in an unprecedented election, this is a man who did not receive the majority of the popular vote, and that's it's a first for the country. And it's emblematic of the fact that we are pretty divisive as a country right now upon political spectrums, rural versus liberal, and so the country right now is reacting, and there's a lot.
You know, it's funny that this next guy, this Witten guy, kind of showed up in Carlson's interview tonight. Because today I watched a bunch of videos about the Portland, Oregon airport city, and how the city has decided that they're not going to put up with it anymore. They arrested a whole bunch of protesters trying to block a street up there. But it's funny. This guy says he's the leader of the movement in Oregon, but I didn't see his face in those videos today. I sure as heck wouldn't forget his face. I didn't see him there. Maybe he was one of those guys that stands in the background that George Soros is paying to incite the riots, to incite the protesters, to do the stupid stuff they do, because then the riot police and the SWAT teams come in and just lock them all up, and they run back to their little safe havens and plan the next movement. They don't give a crap about the ones that went to jail. As a matter of fact, on that video I watched today, there was a black woman running around there, and if you Google Portland, Oregon police protesters, you'll see her. She had a mask across her face, a checkered scarf. Now, it had to be somebody that was in the crowd that was doing the video, because the minute the police showed up and they made their formation and they started running, they were blocking a bus from crossing the road, which was blocking a whole bunch of traffic behind them. The minute the police showed up and formed up and they started their movement, they started running towards the protester crowd, because they meant business and they weren't playing games. You see her sneaking around the backside. She pulls her mask down off her face, and you see her disappear underneath to whoever's camera it was video recording. She didn't get arrested. Nope. She saw him coming, and she was agitating him. She climbed that right on the front of that bus, climbed up on the rack and set up there, and somehow or another she got the signal that the cops were coming. And if you watch that video, you'll see that. And I never saw this man in those videos either. So they must have been employees of George Soros's. So once again, idiots in Southern California, now up in Portland, Oregon. And this guy here is unbelievable. He did no preemptive research or got educated on nothing. You'll get a giggle out of it. There's 7 countries that's on President Trump's list. He couldn't name them. Couldn't name the 7 countries he could name. He named 4, and one of them was wrong, or 2 of them was wrong. Then he gave up. That tells you how much he cares about his cause and what he's doing, and what we were trained in the Army to do when we went to put down riots and strikes and stuff. We were cross-trained in that area, because sometimes the National Guard just got stretched thin, so the regular Army had to come out. We were taught, you look for the guy with the biggest mouth, or the woman with the biggest mouth in the crowd, and that's who you take out. You take them out, you hook them up, and you put them in jail, because the rest of them will get scared to death of what you just did, and they'll dissipate. They'll disappear. You take out the ones with the biggest mouths, and the rest of the crowd will disappear. Let's get back to the video.
reacting, and there's a lot of people who feel like their voices were not heard during this election, and I think that's what we're seeing. That's why I'm out there particularly, is there are a lot of people who...
You're reacting, for sure. But by the way, it has happened before. President Clinton didn't receive the majority of the popular vote in either election, 92 or 96, but whatever, I see your point. You don't like Trump. But you said you've been doing a lot of reading. There's a lot to read. Have you read the executive orders that you're protesting against?
I have read a number of the executive orders. I haven't read all of them. You know, he's signed more than I can probably count. But we do have a lot of organizations out there, like ACLU and different Islamic relation organizations who are out there spreading messages of what's happening. And I've also been reading about the federal judges who've been ruling as well, and the attorney generals, both you know, statewide and nationally, who are also creating orders. There's a lot to read out there. I'm not going to say that I've read everything, and it's just happening so fast, and that kind of shows that we have a White House that is taking action faster than people are able to have a conversation.
Well, I mean, you've probably got internet access. You can pull it up. So just in case you didn't read it, here's a part that you might agree with. I thought of you when I read this, actually. And here's what his first executive order on the refugees says. The United States should not admit those who engage in acts of bigotry or hatred, those who oppress Americans of any race, gender, or sexual orientation. Do you agree with that?
So I'm curious about how that relates to the 7 countries that was put on the travel, immigration, refugee ban that's currently in place.
What are the,
it just seems that if you're going to take... you're asking which of the 7 countries?
Yeah, what are the 7 countries?
Oh, got like Iran, Iraq. I can't list off all of them, but it lists off 7 countries. Right. There's 5 others. I believe that Turkey's probably on it. Syria's on it. Okay, well, Syria's on it. There's a lot of countries.
They're not our country. They're different countries. But here's the point.
But you have countries like Saudi Arabia is not on it. There's a lot of countries that Trump has had business interest in that we've seen not on them. So there's questions about how did you get on that list or not.
I'm trying to get through this here. So I want to get back to this quote, though. This is from, I'm not making this up. I promise this is real. What do you think of that? So basically the executive order says, you should make sure before people come here that they're not going to be committing acts of discrimination when they get here. On the basis of reading race,
green
gender,
cards or have worked for the government. So I'm just really confused. There are people who were already in the air when the executive order was signed.
Really quick.
People who have come to this country before, people who have family here, literally like wives and children, and then they couldn't leave the airport.
Right.
How about them? So have we not already proven? Have they not proven that they love this country?
I want to get back to this specific question. I mean, do you think it's a good idea or not? Before people come over, should you say to them, hey, in our country, we don't discriminate on the base of race or sex or sexual orientation? I mean, are you for that? I mean, I know you don't want to make the application, but what do you think of that?
The application of this executive order is already questionable. We're already seeing people who are discriminated against, and they have never shown...
Okay, I'm sorry.
I think that we should be more focused on building bridges in this country.
I'm so sorry. We'll be right back to you, Cameron. This is a Fox News alert, though. President Trump has fired acting U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates of Georgia, and he's named Dana Bente, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, as acting Attorney General in her place. Yates today had refused to defend the administration's recent executive order.
No matter the crisis, every victim needs justice.
Yates today had refused to defend the administration's recent executive order on immigration. In a few minutes, Senior Policy Advisor Stephen Miller will be here to discuss this breaking news, which is significant. But right now, back to Cameron Whitney, rather. Cameron, sorry we had to break in there. You just heard that the president has fired the acting attorney general. We're going to find out exactly the details in a minute. But I want to get back to something you just said. You said you showed up at airports, and part of the reason that you went is because there were virtuous refugees stuck in those airports and they couldn't get into the country as they deserved to do.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it occurred to you that by protesting outside those airports, you prevented, like normal people, from getting on airplanes and going to their jobs or to see their family or an ailing loved one. You did. And I'm wondering why you thought you had the right to do that, why you thought you had the right to hurt people who had nothing to do with these executive orders at all, who might agree with you. Why did you have a right to hurt them?
So I just want to bring it back to the fact that this all happened in the first place because people were not able to come onto American soil. So yes, I understand that you're asking now out of concern of people who felt like they were inconvenienced for a couple of minutes.
Not who felt
but
like
really, we're talking about people who were afraid of their lives of being deported.
Who were inconvenienced by you?
I'm just going to say that. Okay, well, we have people who celebrated their First Amendment rights. You know, the act of non-violent civil disobedience is a pinnacle of so many rights that we have fought for in this country, and we know that democracy is messy. We know that so much of the freedom that we try to defend every day, we have people who defend freedom both here and abroad. People
Stop the talking points for just 1 second. Talk like a human being for just 1 second, Cameron. Just for 1 second. I've heard all this before for like 25 years. And I agree with the First Amendment. I just want to ask you a really simple human question. Did you think about the people who you were hurting when you blocked access to airports? Did you think, well,
I think about
there's some normal person who wants to get through and they're not getting through because of me?
Their motivation is love. That's why we're out here. We're out here for love. We're out there to make sure that we can spread a message that the entire world can hear. We can't allow one person who just got into office now create the narrative for this country.
People who want to get on a plane to see their mom who's dying or whatever. I mean, what about them?
They got on the plane. They actually, in fact, they got on the plane. So it happened, actually.
You don't seem to care. Which for a man who's acting out of love, you don't seem to care. It's like they're in the way, whatever. We're making our point, First Amendment, rah rah. But like, what about normal people who aren't involved in any of this? They sign no executive orders, and you're hurting them. Like, just acknowledge that you care about them a little bit. Do you?
Yes, I care about everybody in this country. And people did get to the airport. They did get onto their plane. Yeah, you too.
Thanks. This is a Fox News alert not long ago.
Well, frankly, I wasn't surprised that lame-brained Mr. Witten there, Cameron Witten, showed up on TV with Carlson. That's all he wants, is this few minutes of fame on TV. So I hope that the feds watch this video, because if I recall right, he could be party of inciting riots at the airports, because he's the guy that put the program together in Portland, anyway. And then that other guy I showed you the other day, that Jose guy that stood up there and stuck his thumbs up like this in his chest and stuck it all out there and said, "I am Jose and I'm in this country illegally." How stupid can you be there? I hope the feds was watching that one too. Put both of them in jail for a while for the pain and aggravation they've caused. Oh, I'm getting so tired of this stuff. Let's carry on with the rest of this video.
Force his new immigration order. In her place, he has promoted Dana Buente of Virginia. One of the men at the center of this contentious immigration order is Stephen Miller, senior advisor to the president. According to some news sources, he is the very center of all this. He's here to tell us where exactly he stands in the White House. Stephen, great to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So I first got to ask you about the news. When did this happen? What does it mean? And tell us about the replacement.
All right, so tonight we found out that an Obama appointee who was confirmed in 2015 was refusing to enforce the president's immigration order, defend the president's immigration order, and thus refusing to defend the Constitution and refusing to defend the country. It was a betrayal of her office, and she's being replaced with somebody who will enforce the laws in the United States.
Is that person Senate confirmed?
No, it would be an acting position.
It was my understanding, and I, of course, could be wrong, have been before, but that in order to sign certain warrants, wiretapping warrants, for example, federal warrants, you need to have someone at the Justice Department with a Senate confirmation. Is that true, do you think?
Well, there are many layers of people at the Justice Department who've been Senate confirmed.
Okay.
So there's plenty of leadership there who's been Senate confirmed. But and obviously Jeff Sessions will be there very soon as well.
Right.
And we'll all look forward to that very much.
So this does break precedent. I mean, I can't remember the last time anything like this happened. Doesn't mean it shouldn't happen, but it's not a common thing anyway. And
well,
critics are going to say, well, wait a second. You know, if you get in the way, a Justice Department official gets in the way of what the president wants, gets canned, they're going to start invoking Nixon immediately.
What's unprecedented here is that the Justice Department would refuse to defend a lawful federal order for political reasons.
That is dangerous to our constitutional system.
Right.
When somebody sues the government of the United States for doing its duty, the Justice Department is defending the taxpayers of the United States and defending the Constitution of the United States. Refusing to do that is, again, it's a betrayal of the office, and it is unconscionable to do so. And as you well know, Tucker, during the Obama administration, order after order after order was issued that violated immigration law, that repealed immigration law, that pulled immigration law apart. And throughout all of that, the Obama Justice Department stood by and supported those unlawful actions. President Trump comes in and directs the agencies to follow the law as written and to protect the country, and the acting attorney general, an Obama appointee, says, I'm not going to do it.
Are you confident the new acting attorney general will defend the president's executive order?
I am. And as you understand, the core power of the federal government on immigration is its right to deny entry to any alien at any time if it believes that to be in the national interest and national security interest of the United States.
Now, you have been identified in the media over the, well, you've done an awful lot of press coverage in the last couple of days, and you've been identified.
Almost all of it glowing.
I would say none of it glowing. but all of it flattering in the sense that you've been given credit, really, for as the driving force behind these executive orders. Tonight, New York Magazine had a piece, and I'm reading the title, What is Stephen Miller's job anyway? So what is your job anyway? Were you behind the executive orders?
I get a lot more credit than I deserve. The immigration orders were drafted by a team of some of the most qualified, talented lawyers in the United States of America. I had the privilege, among many other staff at the White House, of being involved in the review process. But the review process also included the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. And many of those people who are careers, and presumably many of them who didn't support President Trump, and they cleared it and approved it as fully legal. So many people were involved in it, but I'm proud to have the opportunity tonight to stand up for President Trump's order and to defend that order as lawful, necessary, and important. And as you understand, the United States admits 80 million people a year as visitors into our country. The idea that we couldn't exercise even a small amount of restriction to protect our country from people that we can't properly screen, that's the most basic exercise of federal authority.
Should these orders apply to green card holders?
Well, they actually do not restrict green card holders from returning to the country. The United States, if it wants to, can bar anyone from entering the country who is a non-citizen if it threatens the security of the United States, if there's cause for doing so. But in this case, green card holders have already been waived through and are continuing to be waived through.
Okay, so there's no restriction on green card holders at all. The LA Times said you quote, effectively ran the NSC principals meeting on Saturday.
There wasn't even an NSC principals meeting on Saturday to run. Again, I'm flattered by the suggestion, but I've never attended nor run a National Security Council meeting.
So what is, well, that's interesting, because they said it flat out, and you're denying it flat out. What is your, I mean, what would you say your purview is at the White House?
My main responsibility at the White House is to advise on policy matters. There are a lot of people who have a lot of say in making those decisions. I'm just one voice. I'm blessed to have the opportunity to be a voice.
Yes.
But I think the more interesting thing tonight to discuss, the most important thing to discuss right now, as you and I and everyone listening tonight cares deeply about, is how do we keep this country from falling into the same trap that's
This guy Miller, we need more like him up in the White House, supporting the president. I want you to pay special attention to what he says about these foreign countries like Germany and France that's got themselves in deep shit because they opened up their borders and let all these illegal immigrants into their country. Just pay attention.
Falling into the same trap that's happened to parts of Europe, to places like Germany, to places like France. We have a sort of permanent intergenerational problem of Islamic radicalism that becomes a routine feature of life in those countries, a new normal.
Yes.
How do we keep that from happening in America? If we don't change the way we think about immigration, if we don't change the way we screen and vet and approach the entry process, that will happen in the country.
Yes.
That is a certainty if we don't take strong action starting today.
You are absolutely right on that. How not to become Sweden. I wish more people worried about that. Thanks a lot, Stephen Miller. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Howie Kurtz will join us for news abuse.
The reality of it is, folks, is this, as Mr. Miller said, and I've seen this kind of stuff with my own eyes because I've told you I worked security for many, many years in Southern California. I was right down in the middle of the Rodney King stuff, in the middle of the Reginald Denny stuff. I trained, excuse me, I trained K9s. I was captain of a riot, professionally trained riot team. We were all ex-military. We were the guys that went in to try and save the property of people's that was getting looted. I recall one time I was working a strike, and the employees themselves firebombed the warehouse. Now, what good was that? They burned down their jobs. They're not going to get their, even if they got their jobs back, they'd have no place to go. Tried to burn the warehouse down. I'll never forget that. Of course, with the Reginald Denny and the Rodney King stuff, because I was a canine handler, I had a responsibility of helping to clear crowds without them getting hurt too bad or getting hurt at all. With my dog, his full name was Warcry Eagle of Love. Warcry was the kennels he came from, and I just called him Eagle for short. And he loved people, but he would take a bite of your ass and you'd know it if you got out of line. I had a couple guys try it on me. Turned my back, and Eagle didn't even say anything to him, didn't bark at him, didn't do nothing. He just reached up and snatched a hold of their arm, and missing a big chunk of muscle and skin and everything else for being stupid. Over in Germany and France, other countries, I mentioned earlier, they're having this immigration problem. And it's true. The young men that they let into their nations run around in groups and snatch up women and rape them right on the spot. Snatch up a couple of them at a time, drag them back someplace and rape them there. Then they might beat them. Some of them they beat to death. Some parts of those countries that even the police are afraid to go into. I don't know what's going on with the military. I don't recall ever seeing any videos where the military was involved. Or maybe it's because the Muslims in those neighborhoods have gotten so strong that even the military doesn't want to get in the middle of it. But it's pretty ugly looking. Just need to go up on the internet and look at some of those videos of those nations and those countries where this crap's going on. Frankly, I don't know what I'd do if I walked out in the middle of Ohio here. Dayton's a sanctuary city next to the town I live in, and I'm sure there's a few other towns. And they were rioting over there in Dayton and raping women and stuff. I don't know what I'd do. I can tell you it probably wouldn't be good for them. So every time I think about that Kate Steinle, and I hear and I remember and I think about her asking her daddy to help me, daddy. Help me, daddy. I never had kids. Because when I was in the military, I made an early commitment in life that I would never have kids. I would never bring kids into this rotten ass world. And frankly, I've had second thoughts about it, but here lately, I'm glad I didn't. Because by this time, if my kids got stupid enough to get out there in the middle and start protesting and rioting and stuff, I'd disown them, I'd cut them out of the wheels, and I'd throw all their shit on the street. That's exactly what I'd do. And I'd tell him, like my dad told me, you're making your own bed now. You're going to have sleep in it. I'll be back.
Georgia was fired tonight by the President of the United States. And we want to read a statement here. This is from the White House, and it's just come out. The acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, has betrayed the Department of Justice by refusing to enforce a legal order designed to protect the citizens of the United States. Ms. Yates is an Obama administration appointee who is weak on borders and very weak on illegal immigration. She's going to be replaced by a new acting Attorney General, Dana Buente. That's how, and I apologize, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. We're joined now by our old friend, Howie Kurtz of Media Buzz, who, by the way, has covered government in Washington for more decades than he will admit.
And the Justice Department. And this is a bombshell, Tucker.
It is.
And even as we speak, I am sure some of the president's detractors are typing up messages saying, likening this to Richard Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre in 1973 when he fired an Attorney General and an acting Attorney General who refused to fire the Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cobb. The parallel is completely off because, as you just noted, Sally Yates, who is the acting Attorney General, she worked for the Obama administration. She is not, as far as I can tell, making legal arguments against defending the president's action on immigration. She is saying it is a moral matter. So the president coming back and saying this is pure politics. I'm sure some people will argue it the other way. That's debatable, but it is no Saturday Night Massacre.
That's right. And that was the striking thing about Sally Yates's statement. That the Justice Department, under her leadership, would not be defending these. She didn't bother to make a legal case. In fact, the legal part was almost an addendum to the original statement, which said, in effect, I think this is wrong, and we're not going to do it.
You know, when you're the government's lawyer, I mean, you can always resign as a matter of conscience. Sally Yates chose not to do that, but to make a statement that she's not going to defend this. So the new president, who hasn't been able to get his anointed Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, because the Senate Democrats are delaying that a bit, dragging their feet a bit, is within his rights to say, I'm going to put my own person in. But, of course, it will fuel the criticism of those who don't agree with this policy on immigration and temporary ban on refugees by saying, well, Trump had to get his own person in there. But, again, she's an Obama holdover, and that's a major part of this story.
So what do you think the calculation, I mean, not that we know, but what would it seem to be, the thinking on this in the Trump administration?
Well, look at it this way. If President Trump did nothing, he would have a Justice Department that was not going to go into court, and there are some proliferating lawsuits here to defend his position, which, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it is his right as president to issue that executive order. Or he could say, look, this is somebody from the Democratic administration, doesn't agree with this. He makes the political charge. She's out of there. He puts his own person in, who will only be in there until Sessions is confirmed. And at least then he has some legal backup from the DOJ, which is what any president would get from his own or her own job.
This would seem to increase the intensity of the nomination of Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama.
Right. One could certainly see additional incentive, shall we say, for Senate Democrats to drag their feet even further, because when Jeff Sessions gets in there, obviously he's the hand-picked Attorney General. Obviously, he was a big supporter of Trump during the campaign. You know, I was going to come in here with the news abuse examples. For example, Politico today has a big headline about this immigration controversy, emotional and divisive as it is. President Trump's first defeat. This is not by some random dude. It's by the editor-in-chief of Politico magazine, Blake Hounshaw, who says the immigration order has created an international mess and a political embarrassment. Well, it's not a defeat. The president is going to get his way on this. It has certainly caused a lot of protests. There are a lot of people who don't like it. Democrats don't like it. Some world leaders don't like it. And it got off to a very rocky rollout. But I think now we've just raised the stakes, or Sally Yates raised it, to use a poker term.
Yes.
President Trump raised her one, putting in his own person. That will create a lot of criticism and media coverage, but if you strip away the politics of the moment, the president's entitled to have the Justice Department back him up unless he's ordering something illegal. I don't think anybody has suggested this is illegal.
Also, how could you assess whether a policy is a victory or a defeat 3 days in? It seems a little premature to be making statements about whether it works or not, right?
Unless it's not actually a legal assessment, but a political assessment. And of course, you know, the President Trump and his people have made no secret of the fact they think that they're getting very negative coverage in this first week. Look, he's done a lot of controversial things. It should be debated. This issue should be debated. But at the same time, if people are going to be declaring it a defeat 48 hours after it happened, remember, it's a temporary ban, people losing sight, 90 days, 120 days, depending on the situation. That seems a little premature, and it seems to fuel the White House notion that it is very hard to get an even break for this president in his opening days.
What's interesting now, most of this played out, the protests against these executive orders played out over the weekend, and so not all of our viewers are going to be familiar with it, with what happened. But I didn't see a great deal of debate. I instead saw a great deal of outrage, sort of undisguised outrage from the press, saying, in effect, this is immoral.
And here is what is so surprising about that. President Trump said repeatedly during the campaign that this is what he was going to do. This is very similar to exactly what he talked about in the campaign, and yet many in the press acted as if it was some great shock that he took this action, maybe not really believing he would carry it out, thought it was just campaign rhetoric. Now, there is another side to this. The White House rushed this order. There were a lot of unintended consequences. Right. There was chaos of the evidence, all part of the story. And we should debate it, and it's a legitimate subject for journalistic scrutiny. But there's just a sense of shock, and I would say some negativity, that a new president actually did something, controversial as it was, that he promised during the campaign.
Well, Stephen Miller, I thought, raised a really interesting question, maybe the core question, which is how do you not become Europe? How do you not wind up with a society that's totally divided along tribal lines and religious lines, where everyone's freedoms are abridged because of your immigration policy?
There are two sides to this. There is the security side, how we prevent terrorists from getting onto our shores. So the New York Daily News had a weeping Statue of Liberty, looking only at the side of, the humanitarian side. We love to take in these immigrants. We can't take in all the immigrants.
Yes.
And so that's a debate, but I think the press coverage has focused pretty heavily on the side of how this is somehow an affront to refugees. It's a real balancing act. It's hard to know exactly where the line should be drawn, but this is what Trump campaigned on.
Yeah, I haven't heard. Have you seen any news outlets? I know you read them all for a living. Have you seen any of them at least raise the substantive questions behind this? Like,
yes.
So, to wrap this up for this evening, I need to tell you all the opinions and views expressed in this video are my views, my opinions. I own the Buckeyenest, so I am the Buckeyenest. They are not the opinions and views of the other organizations I mention in these videos, the nonprofits that I support out to Dayton, VA. They're mine. And I'm going to tell you, like they told you in this video, if we don't do something about this immigration, if we don't put restrictions at our borders, if we don't build the wall, we're going to be in deep shit in this country. Deep shit. It's going to come to the point where old soldiers like myself are going to have to get involved, right along with the young ones. And the public's probably not going to like the response. But if you don't do something about all these protests going on, if this country doesn't get back together, if we get divided, I can tell you this, I'm not going to stand by and watch the women in my country get raped. I'm not going to stand by and watch some young man puff out his chest and say, I'm the baddest motherfucker on this planet, on this soil, and smack a woman or rock them, throw a rock at them. I'm not going to do that. And I know there's a whole lot of other guys out there, veterans, that won't let it happen either. But you can't put us in that position, folks. Don't put us in that position. We're too old to be messing around with stuff like this. Back in the day, we could go 15 rounds with a young guy, walk away laughing and giggling, wipe the blood off your chin or off your mouth. Can't do that now. You got to take a little more decisive action immediately. So this has been episode 6 of From a Veteran's Point of View. I'm going to be out at the Dayton VA recording the 4 chaplain ceremony this coming Friday, February 3rd. Starts at 12 noon. Pretty awesome event in the Protestant Chapel. Miami Valley Military History Museum will be there doing a pinning ceremony for Vietnam veterans. So until next time, this has been Rex. And I'll be back. Maybe I'll have Franco back by that time too.